The darkness of space held many secrets, and Scout Commander Vexthal believed he had seen most of them. His ship glided silently through the void, sensors reaching out like invisible fingers to touch everything around him. He commanded 3 vessels today, each one equipped with the finest technology the Xyloth Empire could offer. They were hunting for something unusual, something that had been detected near the border of human territory. Vexthal studied the readings on his main screen. Strange energy patterns had been reported in this sector for 3 days now. The Xyloth Empire wanted answers. They always wanted answers before they moved forward with their plans. 47 star systems had fallen to the Empire over the centuries, and each conquest had started with careful observation. Humans would be no different. The scanning officer turned toward Vexthal with an expression of surprise. They had found something big. The sensors showed multiple contacts emerging from a nearby nebula, their heat signatures bright against the cold backdrop of space. Vexthal ordered his ships to move closer while maintaining their cloaking fields. The technology that hid them from detection had never failed before. As they approached, the scale of what they were seeing became clear. 23 warships moved in formation, each one bristling with weapons and armor plating. The largest vessel led the group, its hull marked with symbols that identified it as the USS Defiance. Vexthal had studied human military organization during his briefing. This was a full battle fleet, commanded by someone of high rank. He felt confused as he watched the human ships move. According to everything the Xyloth knew, humans were barely capable of space travel. They had only left their home planet 200 years ago. That was nothing compared to the 10,000 years of advancement the Xyloth enjoyed. Yet these ships looked formidable. They moved with purpose and coordination that suggested training and discipline. The science officer on the second scout ship sent a message through their secure channel. The energy readings from the human fleet were strange. They fluctuated in ways that made no sense. Advanced ships should have clean, efficient power signatures. These human vessels showed chaotic patterns, almost random in their distribution. It was like watching primitive technology struggle to maintain stability. Vexthal ordered his scouts to begin deep scanning procedures. They needed to understand human weapons and defenses. The Empire would want detailed reports about shield strength, reactor output, and weapon capabilities. He watched as sophisticated scanning beams reached across the distance between the scout ships and the human fleet. Aboard the USS Defiance, Admiral Jack Morrison stood on the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His uniform was crisp and clean, bearing the marks of someone who had earned his position through years of service. He turned to his tactical officer with a slight smile. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant was bent over her console, fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. She looked up at the Admiral and gave a small nod. They had company. 3 vessels were out there, invisible to normal sensors but detectable through the specialized equipment human ships carried. The aliens thought they were hidden, but they were wrong. Admiral Morrison watched the display showing the approximate positions of the alien scouts. He had expected this. Intelligence reports had suggested the Xyloth Empire was preparing to expand into human space. They always sent scouts first, gathering information before committing their main forces. It was a pattern they had followed for thousands of years. Captain Ryan Martinez commanded the USS Harbinger, positioned near the rear of the formation. His ship was smaller than the Defiance but carried its own impressive arsenal. He noticed the electromagnetic fluctuations first, the telltale signs of active scanning beams touching his hull. His chief engineer, Beth Rodriguez, confirmed his suspicion within seconds. They were being examined like specimens under a microscope. Martinez opened a communication channel to the other ship captains. Commander Kyle Harper of the USS Vengeance responded first, his voice calm despite the situation. Captain Emma Wallace of the USS Sentinel and Captain Dan Foster of the USS Guardian both reported the same thing. The entire fleet was being scanned by whoever was watching them. Admiral Morrison called for a secure video conference. The faces of his senior commanders appeared on screens around his command chair. They all knew what this meant. First contact with the Xyloth Empire was happening right now, even if the aliens thought they remained undetected. Morrison made his decision quickly. He ordered Protocol Omega-7 to be activated across the entire fleet. The protocol had been developed 3 years ago, after humanity's first encounter with hostile alien forces. That battle had taught human scientists and military leaders a valuable lesson. Advanced technology could be powerful, but it could also be vulnerable in unexpected ways. The research that followed had produced something remarkable. Dr. Megan Shaw worked in a laboratory deep inside the Defiance. She was the chief scientist assigned to the fleet, a woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical style. Her team had spent years perfecting the weapon system that was now being prepared for activation. She called it the Cascade Generator, though the name barely captured what it actually did. The weapon didn't fire bullets or energy beams. It didn't launch missiles or deploy bombs. Instead, it broadcast a special kind of signal that exploited how advanced computers processed information. Human scientists had discovered that alien technology, for all its sophistication, followed predictable patterns. Everything was optimized for efficiency and speed. That optimization created a weakness. Human technology was different. It was messy and sometimes inefficient. Human computers adapted and learned instead of just calculating. They could handle chaos and randomness because they were built by a species that had survived through constant adaptation. Earth had been a harsh teacher, forcing humanity to develop solutions that worked even when conditions were unpredictable. All 23 ships in the fleet began powering up their cascade generators. The energy built slowly at first, then faster as the systems synchronized with each other. A harmonic resonance started to form, spreading through space like ripples on a pond. The frequency was carefully calculated to interact with quantum-based systems, the kind that advanced civilizations used in all their technology. Vexthal continued his scans, unaware of what was coming. His confidence remained strong. The cloaking fields were holding perfectly. His ships had the best sensors in the known galaxy. He was gathering excellent intelligence about human capabilities. Soon he would report back to his commanders, and they would begin planning the invasion. The human fleet maintained its course, showing no signs of alarm or concern. Admiral Morrison watched the power levels rise on his display. The cascade generators would reach full charge in less than a minute. He wondered if the aliens would understand what was about to happen to them. Probably not. No one ever did until it was too late. Lieutenant Alex Chen monitored the alien positions from his station. He could see them clearly now, their cloaking fields starting to shimmer as the cascade effect began to take hold. The young officer had studied the theory behind the weapon, but had never seen it used in actual combat. He felt nervous excitement building in his chest. Commander Kate Sullivan prepared to broadcast a message as soon as the Admiral gave the order. Her communication systems were ready on all frequencies. She had practiced the words many times during simulations. Soon she would speak them for real, and the Xyloth scouts would hear humanity's voice for the first time. The final seconds counted down. The cascade generators reached full power across all 23 ships. Admiral Morrison gave the command and the weapon activated. An invisible wave of quantum noise burst forth from the human fleet, spreading outward at the speed of light. It reached the Xyloth scout ships almost instantly. Everything changed in that moment. Vexthal felt the change before his instruments showed him anything was wrong. It was like a vibration in the air, except there was no air in space. His primary console flickered once, then twice, and then the screen filled with symbols he had never seen before. The navigation computer was showing impossible coordinates, placing his ship in 17 different locations at the same time. The science officer shouted from across the control room. The scanning systems were receiving contradictory data. Their sensors claimed the human fleet was both advancing toward them and retreating away at speeds that violated physics. The computer kept trying to make sense of the information and failing. Error messages cascaded across every display, multiplying faster than anyone could read them. Vexthal reached for his communication panel to contact the other scout ships. The system responded by playing back his own voice from a conversation he had recorded 3 days ago. He tried again, and this time the panel went completely dark. The sophisticated artificial intelligence that managed ship operations was making decisions that defied logic. It shut down critical systems while activating ones that served no purpose. On the second scout ship, the pilot watched in horror as her navigation controls locked completely. The ship began rotating slowly, its thrusters firing in random bursts that sent it into an uncontrolled spin. She tried to override the commands manually, but the computer refused to recognize her input. It was as if the ship had decided she was no longer authorized to fly it. The third scout vessel suffered the worst fate. Its reactor monitoring system detected patterns in the quantum noise that it interpreted as a core breach warning. Safety protocols engaged automatically, ejecting the reactor containment pod into space. The crew suddenly found themselves drifting without power, their backup systems struggling to come online while the main computer continued processing the flood of meaningless data. Back on the lead scout ship, Vexthal struggled to understand what was happening. His life support system was cycling through different atmospheric settings, changing the air pressure every few seconds. The lights dimmed and brightened in no particular pattern. The artificial gravity fluctuated, causing loose objects to float briefly before crashing back down. His second officer managed to access a backup display using manual controls. What she showed him made his blood run cold. The cloaking field had failed completely. All three scout ships were now visible to anyone looking in their direction. They were exposed, helpless, and their technology was destroying itself from the inside. Aboard the USS Defiance, Lieutenant Alex Chen watched the alien vessels with fascination. The cascade effect was working exactly as Dr. Shaw had predicted. The sophisticated Xyloth computers were trying to process the quantum noise, attempting to filter it and optimize around it. Each attempt created feedback loops that spread through their interconnected systems like a virus. Dr. Shaw stood beside Admiral Morrison, explaining what was happening to the alien ships. She spoke in simple terms so everyone on the bridge could understand. The aliens had built their technology to be perfect, to handle information with maximum efficiency. When faced with true randomness, their systems could not adapt. They kept trying to find patterns where none existed, exhausting their processing power in endless recursive loops. Admiral Morrison nodded slowly as he listened. Human technology was different because humans themselves were different. They had evolved on a planet where survival meant adapting to constant change. Ice ages came and went. Climates shifted. Diseases spread. Humanity learned to build tools that could function even when conditions were unpredictable and chaotic. Commander Kate Sullivan received the signal from the Admiral. She opened communication channels on every frequency she could access. Her voice went out across the void, carrying a message that would be the first official contact between humanity and the Xyloth Empire. She identified Admiral Morrison and the United Earth Fleet. She told the aliens to shut down their systems completely and prepare to be escorted to neutral space. She promised they would not be harmed if they cooperated. Captain Ryan Martinez ordered his crew to prepare a boarding team. The USS Harbinger carried specialists trained in alien first contact procedures. They would need to help the Xyloth scouts before their ships tore themselves apart. Martinez selected Captain Greg Palmer to lead the team. Palmer was experienced and calm under pressure, exactly the kind of person needed for this delicate situation. On the Xyloth lead scout, Vexthal finally managed to shut down the main computer core. The sudden silence was almost deafening. Without the artificial intelligence managing everything, the ship became a collection of separate systems that had to be operated manually. It was like going back 10,000 years in technological development. His crew worked frantically to stabilize their vessel. The engineering team bypassed damaged circuits and rerouted power through backup lines. They discovered that older, simpler systems were still functional. The quantum-based computers were completely corrupted, but basic mechanical controls still responded to input. Vexthal received the human message through an emergency receiver that operated on primitive radio frequencies. The translation came through garbled but understandable. The humans were offering assistance. He felt humiliation wash over him. His superior technology had failed completely, and now the supposedly primitive species was offering to rescue him. He had no choice. His pride meant nothing if his crew died in the cold of space. He ordered his second officer to respond to the human transmission. They would accept the offer of help. They would surrender to these strange beings who had defeated them without firing a single conventional weapon. The human boarding shuttle approached the Xyloth scout carefully. Captain Greg Palmer and his team wore protective suits, not knowing what atmosphere the aliens breathed or what diseases they might carry. The shuttle docked with the scout ship using a universal coupling system that humans had developed. After studying recovered alien technology, Palmer stepped through the airlock and found himself facing Vexthal for the first time. The Xyloth commander was tall and thin, with gray skin and large eyes that showed intelligence and current distress. Palmer raised his hand in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. He carried a device that would allow communication between their species. Vexthal accepted the communication device cautiously. When he activated it, he heard Palmer's voice translated into his own language. The human introduced himself and his team. He explained they were there to help stabilize the scout ship and prevent any loss of life. He spoke with respect, not as a conqueror addressing defeated enemies. The human boarding team spread throughout the scout ship, working alongside Xyloth crew members. They brought portable generators to restore power to critical systems. They provided shielded communication devices that were not affected by the quantum noise still radiating from the human fleet. They showed the aliens how to isolate their damaged computers and run their ship on manual backups. Palmer stood beside Vexthal on the bridge, watching the humans work. The Xyloth commander felt confusion mixing with his shame. These humans used tools that looked crude and bulky. Their equipment was inefficient and required more power than necessary. Yet everything they brought worked perfectly. It functioned in conditions that had crippled all Xyloth technology. Vexthal asked Palmer how this was possible. How could less advanced technology defeat systems that had been refined over thousands of years? Palmer smiled and tried to explain. He talked about adaptation and resilience. He described how human history had been filled with setbacks and failures, each one teaching lessons about building things that could survive unexpected challenges. The explanation made little sense to Vexthal at first. The Xyloth had always believed that advancement meant optimization. Every new generation of technology was faster and more efficient than the last. They had eliminated redundancy and waste. They had created systems that performed at theoretical maximum capacity. How could that be a weakness? Palmer called for Dr. Shaw to come aboard and explain further. The scientist arrived within the hour, eager to discuss her research with someone who might appreciate its implications. She brought diagrams and data on a simple tablet computer that could withstand almost any interference. Shaw sat down with Vexthal in a quiet corner of the bridge. She explained adaptive chaos theory in terms the translator could handle. She showed him how human technology embraced randomness instead of fighting against it. She demonstrated how the cascade generator exploited the very efficiency that made Xyloth systems so powerful. Vexthal listened carefully, his mind racing as he began to understand. Every species the Xyloth Empire had encountered had followed the same development path. They all pursued perfect efficiency. They all built technology that maximized processing speed and minimized resource use. Humans had gone a completely different direction. The implications were staggering. The Xyloth Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest vulnerability. Any species that discovered what humans had learned could potentially cripple the entire Imperial fleet. 10,000 years of advancement meant nothing if the foundation was flawed. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and watched the rescue operations proceed on his main display. 3 human teams were now aboard the alien scout ships, helping to stabilize systems and prevent further damage. He had ordered the cascade generators to reduce their output by half. The quantum noise still filled the space around them, but it was no longer overwhelming. The aliens could at least think clearly now. Commander Kyle Harper reported from the USS Vengeance that the second Xyloth scout was secure. The crew had been frightened when their ship started spinning out of control, but they were calming down now that humans were helping them. Harper's engineering team had managed to stop the rotation and restore basic life support. The aliens would survive. Captain Emma Wallace sent a message from the USS Sentinel about the third scout vessel. That ship had lost its reactor and was running on emergency battery power. Her team was installing a portable human generator that would keep the aliens alive until they could be towed to a repair facility. The Xyloth crew had been initially resistant to accepting help, but desperation had overcome their pride. Vexthal sat in his command chair, feeling older than his years. Dr. Shaw had returned to the Defiance, but her words continued to echo in his mind. He looked around at his bridge crew, seeing the same stunned realization on their faces. They had all been trained to believe in Xyloth superiority. That belief had just been shattered by a species they had considered primitive. Captain Greg Palmer remained on the scout ship, coordinating with the Xyloth crew to bring more systems back online. He worked alongside an alien engineer named Perilous, who seemed fascinated by the human tools despite the circumstances. Krellox kept asking questions about how the equipment functioned. Palmer answered as best he could through the translator device. The alien engineer picked up a human power wrench and examined it closely. The tool was heavy and required manual operation. A Xyloth equivalent would be lighter, faster, and controlled by thought interface. Yet this crude human tool worked perfectly even with quantum noise saturating the environment. Krellox asked why humans built things this way. Palmer explained that human tools needed to function in many different situations. Earth had extreme environments ranging from frozen poles to scorching deserts. Equipment had to work whether power was available or not. Humans learned early that simple and reliable was often better than complex and efficient. A tool that worked every time was more valuable than one that worked perfectly most of the time. Aboard the USS Defiance, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant ran continuous scans of the surrounding space. She wanted to make sure no other Xyloth vessels were approaching. The scout ships would have sent regular status reports back to their command. When those reports stopped coming, someone would notice. The Empire might send warships to investigate. Admiral Morrison considered the same possibility. He called a meeting with his senior officers in the conference room adjacent to the bridge. Captain Ryan Martinez joined via video link from the USS Harbinger. Captain Dan Foster connected from the USS Guardian. They needed to decide what to do with their alien prisoners. Martinez suggested taking the scouts back to Earth for questioning. The intelligence value would be enormous. Foster argued for releasing them immediately to avoid escalating tensions with the Xyloth Empire. Commander Kate Sullivan proposed a middle option. Take the aliens to a neutral space station where repairs could be made, then let them go with a message for their leadership. Morrison listened to all the suggestions before making his decision. He agreed with Sullivan's approach. Holding the aliens would make humanity look aggressive. Destroying them would guarantee war. But releasing them with full knowledge of human capabilities would send a powerful message. The Xyloth Empire would need to reconsider any invasion plans. Dr. Shaw spoke up from her position at the table. She reminded everyone that 3 scout ships were not a significant military threat. The real question was what would happen when the Empire learned about Cascade technology. Would they try to develop countermeasures or would they seek peaceful relations instead? Human leadership needed to prepare for either possibility. The Admiral agreed and ordered Sullivan to begin composing a formal message to be delivered through the scouts. The message would explain human intentions and offer diplomatic contact. It would also make clear that humanity possessed the means to defend itself against technologically superior forces. The tone needed to be firm but not threatening. Vexithal received notification that Admiral Morrison wanted to speak with him directly. He accepted the communication, and the human admiral's face appeared on a working display screen. Morrison looked stern but not hostile. He spoke slowly so the translator could keep up. Morrison explained that the human fleet would escort the EU scout ships to a neutral station called Waypoint Sigma. It was located on the border, between human and unaligned space. Repairs would be made there, and the scouts would be free to leave. In exchange, Vexthal would carry a message back to his superiors. The message would contain an offer of peace and a warning about the consequences of aggression. Vexthal agreed to the terms. He had no leverage to negotiate anything better. His ships were crippled, his technology had failed, and he was completely at human mercy. He asked Morrison why humans were showing such restraint. Many species would have destroyed the scouts or taken them prisoner. Why offer help and freedom? Morrison considered the question carefully before answering. He explained that humanity had learned hard lessons from its own history. Wars and conflicts had taught them that making enemies was easy, but making peace was valuable. Humans preferred to have trading partners rather than battlefields. If the Xyloth Empire could accept coexistence, humanity would welcome it. The conversation ended, and Vexthal felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that he and his crew would survive, shame at their defeat, curiosity about these humans who thought so differently from any species he had known. He realized that his report to the Empire would change everything. The intelligence he carried was far more significant than anything he had expected to find. Over the next several hours, human teams worked to make the Xyloth scouts stable enough for travel. They installed backup systems and replaced damaged components with human equivalents. The repairs were temporary and ugly, but they would hold until proper Xyloth facilities could be reached. Captain Greg Palmer finally left Vexithal's ship and returned to his shuttle. He had spent 6 hours helping the aliens, and he was exhausted. As he strapped into his seat for the ride back to the USS Harbinger, he thought about the expressions he had seen on alien faces. Fear had gradually given way to wonder and grudging respect. Maybe this first contact would lead to something positive after all. The human fleet formed up around the 3 scout ships. Admiral Morrison ordered a course set for Waypoint Sigma at moderate speed. The Xyloth vessels could not travel fast in their damaged condition. The journey would take 3 days. Morrison assigned rotating guard shifts to watch the aliens, but he did not expect trouble. The scouts had learned their lesson. Dr. Shaw returned to her laboratory, already thinking about improvements to the cascade generator. The test had been successful beyond her hopes, but she knew the technology was still in its early stages. If war came despite diplomatic efforts, humanity would need more advanced versions of the weapon. She also worried about what would happen if hostile species learned to counter the cascade effect. Lieutenant Alex Chen took a break from his station and visited the ship's observation deck. He looked out at the stars and the damaged alien vessels being escorted by human warships. His grandmother had told him stories about first contact with alien species. Those early encounters had been violent and costly. This time felt different. This time humanity had proven itself without slaughtering anyone. Vexthal walked through his damaged ship, checking on his crew. They were shaken but recovering. The humans had provided food and medical supplies. Some of his people were actually talking with the human technicians, sharing stories through the translation devices. Language barriers and cultural differences did not seem to matter when people worked together toward a common goal. The alien commander stopped at a viewport and stared at the human fleet surrounding him. Those 23 warships represented something he had not expected to find. Not superior firepower or advanced technology, but rather a completely different approach to survival. Humans had turned their weaknesses into advantages, their limitations into strengths. He wondered what his superiors would say when he returned with his report. The Empire had conquered 47 star systems by identifying enemy weaknesses and exploiting them. Now they faced a species whose weakness was actually their greatest weapon. How did you conquer people who thrived in chaos and adapted to any challenge? The answer troubled Vexthal deeply. Perhaps you did not conquer them at all. Perhaps you learned to live alongside them instead. The journey to Waypoint Sigma passed slowly for everyone involved. The human fleet maintained a steady pace, carefully matching their speed to what the damaged Xyloth scouts could handle. Admiral Morrison used the time to learn everything he could about the aliens. He ordered his officers to document every interaction and observation. This information would be vital for future relations with the Xyloth Empire. Vexthal spent most of his time speaking with Dr. Shaw through video communications. The human scientists seemed eager to share knowledge, which surprised him greatly. Most species guarded their technological secrets carefully, yet Shaw explained the principles of adaptive chaos theory as if she were teaching a student. She showed him equations and diagrams that detailed exactly how the cascade generator functioned. The alien commander asked why she was being so open. Shaw smiled and explained that hiding the information served no purpose. The Xyloth would eventually understand how they had been defeated. Being honest now might build trust for future interactions. Besides, knowing how something worked and being able to counter it were 2 very different things. She elaborated on that point. The cascade effect exploited fundamental aspects of how advanced computer systems processed information. To defend against it, the Xyloth would need to completely redesign their technology from the ground up. They would have to abandon 10,000 years of optimization and efficiency. They would need to embrace chaos and redundancy, which went against everything their culture valued. Vexthal understood the terrible truth in her words. His people could not simply update their systems or install new defensive programs. They would have to change their entire approach to technology. That would take decades, perhaps centuries. In the meantime, humanity possessed a weapon that could cripple any Xyloth military force. Captain Ryan Martinez spent time interviewing the crew of the second scout ship. He spoke with a young Xyloth named Vesra, who served as a communications specialist. She was curious about human culture and asked many questions through the translator. Martinez found himself explaining Earth's history, describing the wars and struggles that had shaped humanity. Vesra seemed shocked by the violence in human history. The Xyloth had known conflict, but not on the scale Martinez described. Humans had fought each other with terrible weapons, destroying entire cities and killing millions. Yet they had survived and eventually united. She asked how a species could be so destructive and still reach the stars. Martinez thought carefully about his answer. He explained that humanity's violent past had taught them valuable lessons. They had learned that conflict solved nothing. They had discovered that cooperation achieved more than competition. The journey from tribal warfare to space exploration had been long and painful, but each mistake had made them stronger and wiser. The conversation made Martinez think about his own grandfather, who had served in the last major war on Earth. That conflict had nearly destroyed human civilization. The survivors had vowed never to repeat those mistakes. They had formed the United Earth government and focused their energy on exploration instead of conquest. Perhaps that history made humans different from species like the Xyloth, who had expanded through military dominance. Lauren Price, the diplomatic liaison assigned to the fleet, worked with Commander Kate Sullivan to draft the message for the Xyloth Empire. The document needed to be precise and clear. It had to convey human strength without sounding like a threat. It needed to offer friendship while establishing firm boundaries. Price had studied alien psychology during her training. She knew that species like the Xyloth respected power and directness. Weakness or hesitation would be seen as an invitation to attack. The message had to show that humanity was capable of defending itself while remaining open to peaceful relations. Sullivan suggested including specific technical data about the cascade generator in the message. Price initially disagreed, thinking it would give away too much information, but Sullivan argued that transparency would demonstrate confidence. Humans were not afraid of the Xyloth discovering their secrets because they knew those secrets could not be easily countered. Admiral Morrison reviewed their draft and approved it with minor changes. He added a personal note at the end, addressing whoever commanded the Xyloth forces in this sector. Morrison emphasized that humanity had no desire for war or conquest. They simply wanted to explore space and establish trade relationships. If the Xyloth could accept human sovereignty, both species could benefit from cooperation. Dr. Shaw continued to analyze data from the encounter. Her instruments had recorded everything that happened when the cascade generators activated. The readings confirmed her theories and revealed some unexpected details. The effect had been even more devastating than predicted. Xyloth technology had collapsed almost instantly. She worried about the implications. If the cascade generator became widely known, other species might try to develop similar weapons. The galactic balance of power could shift dramatically. Advanced civilizations that had dominated for millennia might suddenly find themselves vulnerable. Shaw made a note to discuss these concerns with Admiral Morrison. Captain Dan Foster of the USS Guardian took his turn monitoring the Xyloth scouts. His shift was quiet, with no unusual activity from the alien vessels. He used the time to read reports from the other ships. The picture they painted was fascinating. Every human who had interacted with the aliens reported similar observations. The Xyloth were intelligent, organized, and professional. They were not monsters or villains. They were simply people from a different culture with different values. Foster thought about what might have happened if this encounter had gone differently. If the scouts had reported back before being detected, the Empire might have sent an invasion force. Thousands or millions could have died in the resulting war. The cascade generator had prevented that bloodshed by proving humanity could defend itself. Vexthal gathered his senior officers for a private meeting aboard his scout ship. They needed to discuss what they would tell their superiors. The report they carried would influence the Empire's decisions about humanity. Vexthal wanted to make sure everyone understood the stakes. His science officer argued for recommending a full military assault. If humanity possessed such a dangerous weapon, the Empire needed to eliminate the threat before humans could spread their technology to other species. Waiting would only make the problem worse. The engineering officer disagreed. He pointed out that attacking humanity would be suicide. The human fleet had demonstrated they could disable any Xyloth ship at will. An invasion would result in the destruction of the entire assault force. The Empire should seek peace instead. Vexthal listened to both arguments before making his decision. He would report everything honestly and let the High Command decide, but he would also include his personal recommendation. The Empire should open diplomatic channels with humanity. War was not worth the cost when other options existed. The third day of travel brought Waypoint Sigma into view. The space station hung against the backdrop of distant stars, a massive structure that served as neutral territory for multiple species. Admiral Morrison contacted the station administrator to arrange docking for the Xyloth scouts. He explained the situation briefly, mentioning that repairs were needed for damaged vessels. The station administrator, a member of a species called the Verath, agreed to provide facilities. Waypoint Sigma existed specifically to handle situations like this. The station maintained strict neutrality and offered services to anyone who could pay. Morrison assured the administrator that humans would cover all costs for the Xyloth repairs. As the fleet approached the station, Vexthal felt mixed emotions. Relief that the journey was almost over, anxiety about returning to face his commanders, gratitude toward the humans who had saved his crew, and a strange sadness that this unique experience was ending. He had learned so much in 3 days. Captain Greg Palmer made one final visit to the Xyloth lead scout before they docked. He wanted to say goodbye properly. He found Vexthal on the bridge staring at the approaching station. Palmer offered his hand in the human gesture of farewell. Vexthal understood the meaning and clasped the human's hand firmly. They stood there for a moment, two officers from different worlds who had shared an extraordinary experience. Palmer wished Vexthal safe travels and good fortune. Vexthal thanked Palmer for his help and his honesty. They both knew this encounter had changed something important, though neither could predict exactly what the future would bring. The human fleet took up positions around Waypoint Sigma, while the Xyloth scouts docked for repairs. Admiral Morrison sent the prepared message with the alien vessels, sealed in a data device that would survive the journey back to Xyloth space. Everything that needed to be said was now in the hands of the Empire's leadership. The game had changed, and everyone knew it. Waypoint Sigma buzzed with activity as the Xyloth scout ships docked in the repair bays. The station's technicians were skilled in working with various technologies, but even they seemed impressed by the extent of the damage. The quantum-based systems were completely fried, melted from the inside by cascading errors. Replacing them would take at least a week. Admiral Morrison authorized payment for all repairs using human credits. The station administrator seemed pleased with the generous compensation. Morrison wanted the Xyloth to leave with a positive impression. Every small gesture of goodwill might help prevent future conflict. He knew that wars often started over misunderstandings and wounded pride. Vexthal supervised the repairs personally, though there was little he could do except watch. The station technicians removed the damaged computer cores and installed temporary replacements from their inventory. The new systems were basic models, far less sophisticated than what the scouts had carried originally. But they would function well enough to get the ships home. During the repairs, Vexthal received permission to explore parts of Waypoint Sigma. The station housed dozens of species, all coexisting in the neutral territory. He saw beings he recognized and others he had never encountered. The diversity fascinated him. The Xyloth Empire controlled many worlds, but most conquered species were kept separate and managed individually. He stopped at an observation deck that offered a view of the docked ships. The human fleet remained nearby, maintaining a respectful distance. Vexthal could see the USS Defiance clearly, its hull marked with battle scars from previous engagements. He wondered what challenges humanity had already faced in their short time among the stars. A human voice spoke behind him. Captain Greg Palmer had followed him to the observation deck. The human officer carried 2 containers of what he called coffee, a stimulant beverage popular on Earth. Palmer offered one to Vexthal, explaining through the translator that sharing drinks was a human tradition of friendship. Vexthal accepted, curious about the gesture. They stood together in silence for several minutes, watching the ships and the stars beyond. Finally, Vexthal spoke. He admitted that he had underestimated humanity badly. The Empire had made the same mistake. They had looked at human technology and seen primitive tools. They had failed to understand the philosophy behind those tools. Palmer nodded and took a sip of his coffee. He explained that humans had a saying about judging books by their covers. Appearances could be deceiving. Just because something looked simple did not mean it was weak. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. Humanity had learned that lesson through countless failures and disasters. Vexthal asked Palmer what he thought would happen next. Would the Empire accept peace? Or would they try to develop countermeasures and attack again? Palmer admitted he did not know. That decision belonged to people with far more authority than him. But he hoped wisdom would prevail over pride. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. Palmer described Earth's oceans and mountains. Vexthal talked about his homeworld's crystalline forests. They discovered that despite their differences, both species valued beauty and wondered about the universe. The barriers between them seemed less significant than they had before. Dr. Shaw spent her time at Waypoint Sigma, meeting with scientists from other species. She was careful not to reveal too much about the Cascade generator, but she discussed general principles of human technology. Several alien researchers seemed intrigued by the concept of adaptive chaos theory. One scientist from a species called the Minar asked if humans would be willing to share their research. Shaw promised to bring the request to her superiors. She believed that sharing knowledge could benefit everyone, but she also understood that some information needed to be protected. The Cascade generator was a weapon, and weapons in the wrong hands could cause tremendous harm. Humanity had learned that lesson from its own history. The repairs took 6 days instead of 1 week. The station technicians worked efficiently, and the Xyloth crews helped wherever possible. By the end of the 6th day, all 3 scout ships were declared spaceworthy. They would not be as capable as before, but they could safely travel back to Xyloth territory. Admiral Morrison met with Vexthal one final time before the scouts departed. They spoke in a private conference room aboard Waypoint Sigma. Morrison gave the alien commander a data device containing the official message to the Xyloth Empire. He also included technical specifications for basic communication protocols, so future conversations could happen more easily. Vexthal accepted the message with solemnity. He promised to deliver it directly to the High Command. He also gave Morrison his personal assessment of the situation. The Empire needed to understand that humanity was not a target for conquest. They were potential allies or at least neutral neighbors. War would benefit no one. Morrison thanked Vexthal for his honesty and wisdom. He expressed hope that their next meeting would be under better circumstances, perhaps at a diplomatic summit. Vexthal agreed that would be preferable to meeting on a battlefield. They parted with mutual respect, 2 military officers who had learned to see past their differences. The 3 Xyloth scout ships undocked from Waypoint Sigma and began their journey home. The human fleet watched them depart, maintaining position until the aliens were safely away. Admiral Morrison ordered his ships to return to their original patrol route. The mission had taken an unexpected turn, but it had ended peacefully. That was the best outcome anyone could have hoped for. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the interstellar community. Waypoint Sigma served many species, and information flowed freely through its corridors. Within days, dozens of civilizations knew about the human fleet and the weapon that had disabled advanced Xyloth technology. The news created ripples across the galaxy. Some species saw humanity as a threat, others viewed them as potential allies. A few governments sent quiet inquiries to Earth, asking about trade agreements and diplomatic relations. The human government found itself suddenly much busier with foreign affairs than before. The encounter had changed humanity's position in the galactic community. Vexthal arrived back in Xyloth space after 2 weeks of travel. He was immediately summoned to the High Command headquarters. His report took 3 hours to deliver, with frequent interruptions for questions. The military leaders listened with growing concern as he described the cascade effect and its devastating impact on their technology. The debate that followed lasted for days. Some commanders advocated for immediate war before humanity could spread their weapon technology. Others argued that war was unwinnable and would only weaken the Empire. A third faction suggested negotiating from a position of uncertainty rather than proven strength. Eventually, the High Command reached a decision. They would send a diplomatic delegation to meet with human representatives. The Empire would not attack, but they would also not show weakness. They would approach humanity as equals, something they had rarely done with other species. The decision was controversial, but it was the most logical path forward. The message Admiral Morrison had sent played a significant role in that decision. The tone was firm but not hostile. It demonstrated that humans understood their own power, but did not seek to abuse it. The High Command recognized that humanity might be reasoned with, unlike species that conquered for glory or resources. Back on Earth, Dr. Shaw presented her findings to the Scientific Council. She recommended continued development of Cascade technology, but with strict controls on who could access it. She also proposed research into defensive measures in case other species developed similar weapons. The Council approved both recommendations and increased funding for her research division. Admiral Morrison received a promotion and a new assignment. He would command the First Contact Fleet, a specialized force trained to handle encounters with new alien species. The role suited him perfectly. His handling of the Xyloth scouts had proven his ability to balance strength with diplomacy. Captain Greg Palmer and his team were decorated for their actions during the boarding operation. Palmer himself was promoted to commander and assigned to Morrison's new fleet. He looked forward to the challenge. Meeting Vexthal had changed his perspective on alien species. They were not monsters or enemies by default. They were people trying to survive and thrive just like humans. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant continued her work as a tactical officer, now considered an expert on alien detection systems. Her quick identification of the Xyloth scouts had given the fleet crucial early warning. She trained other officers in the techniques she had developed, spreading her knowledge throughout the human military. 6 months after the encounter, formal diplomatic talks began between humanity and the Xyloth Empire. The negotiations were difficult and tense, but both sides approached them with genuine intent to find common ground. Vexthal attended as a military advisor, his experience with humans giving him unique insights. The treaty they eventually signed established mutual recognition and basic trade agreements. It was not a true alliance, but it was a foundation for future cooperation. Both species agreed to respect territorial boundaries and establish communication protocols for emergencies. Most importantly, they committed to resolving disputes through dialogue rather than force. The treaty became a model for human relations with other alien species. In the years that followed, humanity signed similar agreements with a dozen different civilizations. The young species from Earth had proven they could defend themselves while still pursuing peace. That combination earned them respect throughout the galaxy. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship years later, watching stars pass by during a routine patrol. He thought about that day when alien scouts had stumbled upon his fleet. Everything had changed in those few moments when the Cascade generators activated. Humanity had announced its presence not with conquest, but with capability and restraint. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, but humanity had found its place among the stars, not through superiority or submission, but through adaptation and wisdom. They had proven that being different could be a strength. And in a universe of ancient civilizations, that made all the difference.